biblioteca de John F. Kennedy, el JFK. También participé en lo que viene siendo en un museo, en el diseño de un museo que aunque desgraciadamente no se construyó, pero participó en el diseño en Francia.
Muy bien. Pregúntele cuál es el estatus actual de la arquitectura a nivel mundial.
Well, how would you consider architecture in a worldwide point of view? How can you describe it?
I think that today the architecture is in a very interesting period. I don't think I'm necessarily an expert, but I think that there are, for the first time really, a lot of new visions coming from other parts of the world besides the United States, Europe, also in Mexico, of course, you have wonderful architects, and even now beginning in Asia, in Japan, and starting in China as well.
¿Cree que de lo que ha visto por aquí en Monterrey, en la metropolitana, se ha tenido oportunidad de ver algunos edificios que le han parecido?
Have you been able to see architects here in Monterrey?
Well, unfortunately, I arrived late yesterday. I was supposed to come earlier, but I missed my flight. But
Que no se les olvide ir
¿Con quién?
que no se les olvide ir registrando las gentes que lleguen invitados, las gentes, los invitados especiales, para que me los hagan llegar, ¿sí?
Estuvo en que...
Pero él no lo mencionó, sí.
Sí, lo puso en París.
Ah, sí, muy bien. Perfecto.
Si quiere hacer una toma de...
Sí.
Pero sí, ese es un dato muy importante porque es por lo que son más complejos.
just very quickly, then I'm going to show one project in Beijing, a little bit more time, not too long, just to do it, and then I'm going to talk about it. And what I do is show how we
Es que estaba diciendo que son el lunes y a las 11 de la mañana
not touching it. So we try to show that the building was always being touched, continually to its whole history. And then, so then I go through and I describe the construction. It's quite interesting because and so on, political problems and so on. It's like a soap opera almost. It's the whole story of the building of the project, and then finally the finishing of the project, and then some pictures of the finished building. So that's what I do. Okay?
Thank you.
Aunque no necesita. Mi amor.
Señora, ¿me permite?
Pero él
Buenos días. Agradecemos la presencia en esta conferencia magistral del arquitecto Óscar Bulnes Valero, representante del señor gobernador del Estado como secretario de Desarrollo Urbano y Obras Públicas del Estado, del arquitecto Valentín Martínez, en representación del alcalde Felipe de Jesús Cantú de Monterrey, el arquitecto Diego González, secretario de Desarrollo Urbano, del arquitecto Ramón Vázquez Gómez, presidente del Colegio de Arquitectos del Estado de Nuevo León, el ingeniero Eliseo Vázquez Orozco, vicerrector de Finanzas del Sistema ITESM, En representación del doctor Luis Galán Wong de la Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, al arquitecto Juan Alanista Mes, de la Escuela de Arquitectura de la Universidad Regiomontana, al licenciado Rubén Tobón, de la Escuela de Arquitectura de la UDEM, al arquitecto Juan Fernando Sada, de la Escuela de Arquitectura del Centro de Diseño de Monterrey, el arquitecto Alexander Lenoir, en representación del doctor Eugenio García del Tecnológico, el arquitecto Eduardo Padilla, y al arquitecto Rogelio de la Rosa del periódico El Norte. Estimados miembros de la Academia, arquitectos, estudiantes de arquitectura y público en general que nos acompaña esta mañana. El capítulo en Monterrey de la Academia Nacional de Arquitectura, con arte, las escuelas de arquitectura de la Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, del Tecnológico de Monterrey, la Universidad de Monterrey, el CEDIM, la Universidad Regiomontana y los amigos de la Academia, dan testimonio hoy del llamado fenómeno Monterrey como la ciudad de la iniciativa y del trabajo colaborativo. Un lugar donde la gente no espera que sucedan las cosas, sino que hacen que sucedan. A nombre de todos nosotros les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta celebración por la arquitectura y les agradecemos su presencia en este foro de reflexión. Conocer, reconocer y dar a conocer la arquitectura como reflejo de la cultura del hombre, crear para la arquitectura mexicana el ámbito apropiado en la comunidad nacional e internacional que permita a la comunidad entenderla, valorarla y ubicarla como elemento indispensable para la vida a la cual aspiramos, es objetivo toral de nuestra academia. Esta mañana cumplimos cabalmente con este objetivo al reconocer la aportación de Pay Partnership Architects a la arquitectura contemporánea mundial. Arquitectura como arte colaborativo, de continuidad e innovación, que perdura, que tiene esencia, que se conecta con el lugar, que captura el espíritu del tiempo y del hombre, parte naturaleza, parte hombre, magia que emociona, espacio continuo, cuyo refinamiento es modernidad con gracia, tecnología al servicio de la arquitectura y que empuja al límite la expresión y la geometría del espacio. Geometría hecha luz, textura, color, arte, espacio, que dan significado a una obra que se hace única. En suma, constantes variaciones sobre el mismo tema, el espacio, el hombre. Esta mañana, Chien Chung Pei dará cuenta de la arquitectura original que se encuentra en el lugar y en el tiempo, en el problema único a enfrentar en cada proyecto, y que ha cambiado el paisaje urbano para siempre, con edificios dramáticos, elegantes, esculturales, que son energía en movimiento y que transforma a otra escala nuestros sentidos. La emoción, la memoria, pensada y ejecutada a escala del hombre de siempre. Al encontrarnos reunidos hoy ante la obra de Paid Partnership, en este foro de reflexión que es la Academia Nacional, participamos todos de un proyecto común, la renovación de la cultura. Al hacerlo, nos renovamos nosotros mismos, somos un poco mejores. Quiero especialmente agradecer a Didi Pei su presencia al compartir esta mañana con nosotros su teoría y su praxis. Bienvenido a Monterrey.
Buenos días. Quisiera leer un currículum del arquitecto, aunque sea abreviado, una semblanza de su obra y de un poco de su vida, ¿no? Chien Chung, nombrado Didi Pei, obtiene bachillerato en arte cum laude en Harvard en 1968, graduándose en 1972 en la Escuela de Diseño de Harvard con maestría en arquitectura. Antes de fundar Pay Partnership Architects con su hermano Lee en 1992, el arquitecto Pei dedica los primeros 20 años de su carrera contribuyendo en los proyectos más importantes de IM Pei & Partners, ahora Pei Gottfried & Partners. Estuvo a cargo de la mayoría de los proyectos de IM Pei & Partners, entre ellos el Museo del Grand Louvre en París, el Museo de Bellas Artes en Boston y la remodelación del Centro Médico Monte Sinaí en Nueva York. Además de participar y ser jurado en concursos nacionales e internacionales de arquitectura, el arquitecto Pei imparte conferencias en universidades y otros escenarios sobre su teoría del diseño en los proyectos más recientes. Pei Partnership Architects es una firma de arquitectura integral reconocida internacionalmente por su alta calidad de diseño. Su padre, Chien Pei, les transmitió la visión, el compromiso y la esencia de los estándares profesionales para crear una arquitectura duradera y significativa. Actualmente cuentan con 40 años de experiencia, incluyendo los años que trabajó con Chien Pei & Partners, donde dirigieron y estuvieron involucrados en una amplia gama de proyectos premiados internacionalmente. Su experiencia conforma los principios de Pei Partnership Architects, como son excelencia en el diseño, servicio personalizado y una atención meticulosa en el detalle. Hoy, Li y Chien dirigen un grupo de 30 profesionales destacados en diseño y administración de proyectos, técnicos experimentados y arquitectos calificados que con su experiencia y dedicación ayudan a generar soluciones innovadoras y ambientalmente sensibles a los retos de diseño en constante evolución del siglo XXI. Su objetivo es crear arquitectura con significado, que respete los logros del pasado, responda a las necesidades del presente y perdure en el futuro. Asistidos por gerentes de proyecto, uno de los socios dirige personalmente cada trabajo hasta el término de su realización. Por lo tanto, diseño y ejecución no están segregados, asegurando así la continuidad del equipo profesional a lo largo del proyecto. Este compromiso de involucrarse personalmente es el principal componente del diálogo con el cliente, en el cual Pei Partnership Architects pone especial énfasis. Al iniciar la segunda década del despacho, están involucrados en una gran variedad de proyectos en diversas partes del mundo, tales como Nueva York, México, Singapur, Hong Kong, China y demás lugares. Adicionalmente, a la ejecución de planes maestros han diseñado más de 1.2 millones de metros cuadrados de construcción y proyectos. Al ejecutar estos proyectos, Pei Partnership Architects sigue invirtiendo en los más altos estándares de tecnología CAD, en la realización de modelos, imágenes y avanzados sistemas de presentación utilizando tecnología de vanguardia. Sin más preámbulos, con ustedes quisiera introducir al arquitecto Chien Chung Pei. Por favor, arquitecto. Si gusta pasar al frente.
Thank you very much. I apologize, first of all, that I don't speak Spanish, so I'm going to have to do this in English. I hope that those of you who have earphones, you can understand what I'm saying. I want to thank the Academy for inviting me here today, and also I want to congratulate them for all of the spreading of the importance of architecture, not just in Monterrey, but in all of Mexico. Now, this picture here shows my brother and me and our father, and just to explain a little bit about who we are, and of course everybody knows who he is. So this is always a confusion for everybody. But he has retired from his practice about 12 years ago. And now he's continuing, he's in very good health, and he is continuing to do very special projects, usually small projects that are of interest to him. And sometimes we can help him out with those projects. So as a result of his retirement, since we were both working in his office, my brother and I decided 10 years ago to start our own firm And so I'm going to show you next some of our projects that you can see, and you can see, of course, some similarity, except this is a project which we did our first big project in Indonesia for a bank, but this project, which uses the same structural system as you can see for the Bank of China in Hong Kong, actually is quite different because it is two buildings which create, when you have two buildings, you can create an outside space. I'm going to go quickly just to show a little bit of our work because I think that what I have to talk about Paris is more interesting for you. Anyway, this is a project for a hotel that we did in Korea, which also, of course, like a lot of our projects in Asia, were temporarily suspended because of the economy. A project in Hong Kong for a bank. Okay. This is also the same cross-section with the entrance on a very tight piece of property in Hong Kong. Okay. Now this was interesting. We were asked to put an addition. This is a museum which my father did in the 1960s in Syracuse, New York. And and we designed this addition to go on to the museum. This is a new campus outside of Hong Kong, which we designed for high technology companies. An apartment building in Singapore, and the inside of the same thing. This is an opera house which we were designing in Palm Beach, Florida. And the inside, this project also, because of the economy, has been suspended. So this is I think those of you here who are architects will appreciate that many projects that one starts, you start them, you stop them, you start them, you stop them. But I remember very well, one of my father's partners told me a piece of wisdom. He said, the project is never dead until they build another building on the site. This is the renewal of a big urban square, which you can see in the top part of the picture in the western part of China, which was to take a huge square, which was, and to build an underground shopping complex to connect it with the new development and the crossing of two new subway lines. And adjacent, you can see on the top of the picture, was to be built an art museum. And then we were asked to refine the design of the museum, connecting it to the underground plaza, and the inside of that museum, also still proposed. Okay. This is a project which we have at MIT in another one of my father's buildings that my brother had worked on. And so they asked to, and the project is, I'm trying to think, is 15 years old and needs to be completely changed because the use inside the building has changed. And so they have a big donor to give some more money for this project. So this one is still going on. This is a very large hospital, over 100,000 square meters in size, which we have under construction now in Los Angeles at UCLA. This is a project for, I'm sorry I didn't bring pictures of this project is now finished. This is the corporate headquarters for a company called Amgen, also outside of Los Angeles. This is a project which we have going actively in our office, which is the Embassy for the People's Republic of China in Washington, D.C. Okay, then I wanted to show you quickly a little bit about one of our projects which was finished last year, okay, which is the Bank of China headquarters building in Beijing. Now, I hope this microphone is working. Oh, can you go back one? No, the other way. Yes, sorry. This is a picture of Beijing. Here, this is the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square. All of the government compound over here, and our building site, which is right here, which is on, there are only two streets in Beijing which actually go all the way from the north across the city to the south. And one of them is this street here. The other one is on this side over here someplace. And this, of course, is the main east-west avenue which crosses Beijing. I don't know how many of you have been there, but so this site actually is a very important site. Next. Here, a little bit bigger scale, you can see how close it is to the Forbidden City. And the next one. And in fact, this one here, the slide is a little bit cropped on the side, but this is a picture of a map of Beijing in the Ming Dynasty, which is the 17th, 16th, and 17th centuries, where you can still see the city wall here, which goes like this, and over here, around. And so that this site is one of the few sites available inside of the wall. Okay. And what we put there was this headquarters building. Of course, it's a low building, unlike this building in Hong Kong, which is for the same bank. They commissioned my father to do this building because his father had been the president of the bank. And so we are doing this building in Beijing, and they call this building in Hong Kong, they call that one of our branch banks. This, of course, is the headquarters of the bank. So I'm going to show a few pictures quickly. We have the largest enclosed interior space. In fact, in this space here, you can take this whole building and slip it inside. The center, of course, is an adaptation of a Chinese garden with rocks from the western part of China. And 15-meter high bamboo plants, which we brought from central China. Just some images of the building. This, as I said, was opened last year and is now actively being used by the bank. Okay? The banking hall. They still, in China, they're still using banking halls. I know that that is a model which is beginning to go out of favor in most of the rest of the world. Some pictures of the lobby space. And the main reception room at the top, from which you, if you look out exactly in this direction, you can see to the Temple of Heaven, which is another monument of Beijing. That is, if the weather is clear, which usually, unfortunately, it's not. Below, they have a meeting room for the bank employees, which is also can be subdivided. This is, we call the pre-function area outside, and inside the room will seat 2,000 people for presentations. And finally, this picture showing the old Beijing and the new Beijing in one picture. Okay. Now this is a project that I spent, let me see, 9 years working on this project, running this project for my father. Paris. What do you think of when you see Paris? You see these postcards, the Arc de Triomphe, Sacré-Cœur, Notre Dame. This is, to me, it still is maybe the most beautiful city in the world that I know. Oop. Wrong way. So my father was called, after François Mitterrand was elected president. Oh, can you go back? No, you're going the wrong way. One more. Okay. Somebody found this cartoon for us. It says here, we got it. We got the pyramid contract. So we always thought this one was a pretty funny cartoon for us. And so we've kept this in. Okay. In 1982, my father started to talk to President Mitterrand, who had been elected in 1981, about redoing the project at the Louvre, to vacate one whole side and turn the entire building over to the museum. Next. Well, of course, the Louvre is probably the single most important building in all of France. And this is, shows you a picture of the Louvre. In fact, in the 12th century, when it was built by Philippe Auguste, when nobody was in Paris, on the Seine, on the River Seine, and inside the middle, he built a little tower here to house all of his treasures, so that he was protected by a wall and this one thing which was called the donjon, which was to house his treasures. So we decided it was very important to learn the whole history of this building. Next. So you can see from this picture here now is slightly later, the Louvre, still with the donjon in the middle, but now with a whole building around it, and the beginnings of the wall of the city, people starting to begin to build their houses around the palace of the king. Over the years, as successive kings lived here, and by the way, the Louvre was the residence of every king of France throughout its entire history, all the way until the French Revolution, which is obviously one of the reasons why it's such an important building. So here it was, after Philippe Auguste, at the end of the 12th century. Once again, you can see with the donjon in the middle, and all these little towers. And the city started to grow around the king's palace. And so the wall was extended around to further protect it. Obviously, it was protected on the riverside, but was to further protect the inhabitants of the city of Lutetia, as it was called at that time. Next. Here are some more pictures. Obviously, you can imagine that over the times, this was the most illustrated building in France. Now, in the time of Louis XII, and his wife decided to build another house in the countryside. And this was called the Château des Tuileries, which faced the king's gardens out here, which were also the site of the Tuileries, which means the tile factories, where they made tiles for the people in the city. And, but of course they had to put it outside of the city because of the fire. Now here we can see in the 17th century already, now this chateau becomes connected all the way back into the original Louvre. Now you can see here they've taken down that tower in the middle. They don't need that anymore. But the building was extended all the way along the Seine to the chateau, and here were the beginnings of the gardens, and then this was the edge of Paris at that time. Now here, under Henry IV, you can see this is, you should remember this, some of these things here. This is the Louvre, and this is the part all the way along the river over here. And this part, he built a little bit of a moat. You can see that to get into the his old chateau. Okay. And here, of course, is the chateau, the Tuileries along the Seine, as it was connected. Now, at that time, it was very interesting. This is one of the rooms inside the Louvre, and even though it was still the king's palace, it was open to certain people, and was for exhibitions of contemporary artists who would display in this room. And this is the origin of the word salon, which means, because that means actually the room, and this room is actually called the square salon, the salon carré. And people were invited to display and to debate their pictures in this room. So the Louvre had, even though it was a residential, royal residence, it already had the beginnings of being an art museum. Okay. You can see, of course, the whole outside was continually being changed, getting grander and grander as the architectural styles changed. Next. And of course, people built their houses right up against the palace because that was the safest place. Under Louis XIV, he wanted to expand the Louvre and to give it a facelift. And at that time, the best architects were from Italy. So he called Bernini, who many of you architects here will recognize, to come to France and to work on the Louvre. And Bernini did these projects, which were found in the archives of the museum. But unfortunately, they were never built because the French architects complained so loudly that how can you have a foreigner come in and build on the most famous building in France? And so, after years and years, Bernini was sent back to Paris, to Rome rather, and commissioned to do a statue of the king. So he was so disappointed. It took him such a long time to finish the statue. He finally made the statue, sent it back to Louis XIV. But by that time, Louis XIV had abandoned his project at the Louvre. He decided to build another country house in a place called Versailles. So he built himself a country house in Versailles, and he was already much older when this statue arrived of a young Louis XIV. And he didn't like the statue, so he just put it out in the garden someplace in Versailles where, when we were doing some research, we found this statue. Okay, next. So here was the Louvre. Now in the 18th century, you can see all the way along the Seine, turning across, and the Château des Tuileries. But in the Communard, after when they tried to revive the monarchy in France in the 19th century, the Château des Tuileries was burned down. And so leaving, over here you can see in the Louvre, you can see leaving this hole, over here, where the Château des Tuileries had been. So this is what we found when we arrived in Paris in 1982-83. But this was a big problem that the French architects had never been able to resolve. Here you have what had been this axis, which came from the gardens of the Tuileries, which came from the Château des Tuileries, which was right here. And of course, being French, it was straight. And it went forever. Forever, forever. All the way through the Tuileries, Place de la Concorde, all the way the Arc de Triomphe, and so on. But the chateau was no longer there. Next. So what you had is you had this line coming down, and it would hit the Louvre right over here. And so Napoleon put a little baby Arc de Triomphe right here to marked the point where this axis and this axis actually met. But nobody could ever figure out what to do after that. Next. And so this is what we found when we got there. And the reason is that the Seine, the river Seine, makes a bend right there. And so that's why this axis coming all the way in and this axis going out this way meet at this little Arc de Triomphe, which is right there. Okay. So this was the Louvre that we found. This is the building, of course, the Seine. But the next. But the museum was only, I'm sorry, can you go back one? No, the other way. One more, okay. But the museum was this piece and this piece. And this piece was the Ministry of Finance. And that's what François Mitterrand decided, to make them move out of this building over here and to build a new building for them and to give this to the Louvre itself. So you would have the whole thing could become the Louvre. Okay, next. And so the project, as we developed it, was, since we decided that we couldn't touch these facades, these were 19th century French architecture, not the best, but we couldn't touch them. The project had to be underground. And so there's an enormous underground project here, of which the pyramid is just a skylight to let light into the underground. Next. And there, in 1983, my father went up to the balcony of the Minister of Finance, who, after the president, is certainly the most powerful man in France, stood on his balcony and said, that's where we have to do the project, down there. Next. And over the next few months, he made this sketch, which showed here, this is interesting because the pyramid in this sketch is oriented in the other direction. Eventually, the pyramid became like this. But we had the pyramid, and he had little pyramids in the corners here, and the entrance coming this way. Next. And so, in late 1983, we came to Paris with this model, which is at the scale of 1 to 1,000, from here all the way, actually, this picture is cropped off a little bit, but it goes all the way out here. The model was about, I'm trying to remember, was about 3 meters in length. But we wanted to show some of these important spaces of Paris, of course. The Place de la Concorde, and over here, the Palais Royal and Place Vendôme, and so on, to show how the project that we had would work. And even here you can see, coming down this axis, right there, we put some kind of statue to mark the end of that axis. Even then, we knew that we had to do something for that, because of course this axis is going off this way. Next. And so we made this model and presented it to the president. With the rendering of what the inside of the pyramid could be like. So, of course, in explaining the plan, now that this side would become also the museum, it means that you can open up this passageway, which previously had been closed to the public, and make an entrance to this courtyard, which is called the Cour Napoléon, from the right bank of Paris, and try to reconnect the right bank to the left bank, which previously was pretty much closed off because of the museum. And we propose to enclose these courtyards in the Ministry of Finance building to turn them also into galleries. Now here, you can see this picture of the Tuileries Gardens, and you can see this was done by the very famous French landscape architect, André Lenôtre. And you can see this, the whole spirit of this is geometric forms in different combinations with different axes and so on. And that was really what it was that determined the whole, we say, architectural partie of our scheme. It was really a landscape scheme. Here you can see actually in those days that axis, which this is of course today is the Champs-Élysées, but just sort of went all the way out to the end of the world. Next. Here are some other French gardens that you can see utilizing the same principles of geometry, axes, and so on. Next. And so our project was developed really in the same kind of spirit. And here you can see the end of that axis coming through and where it hits right in front of where we put our project. Of course, to build underground was not so easy because right over here you have the Seine. And the underground was almost at the same level as the river itself. So of course, the construction was going to be very difficult. Next. But you can see that if you have this underground, you can come down and you can get up, all underground, and get up into the museum on, in fact, 3 sides, 3 directions. This way, and then going back over to this part of the museum. So we presented this project to the president with those models and drawings and so on, and he said yes. Next. But not everybody agreed. You know, when we got to France, the French architects told us, in France, everything is political. And we said, what do you mean? Because in the United States, architecture is not political. Architecture is architecture. And it doesn't have any political flavor. But in France, everything becomes politicized. And so, immediately, some very well-known authors, Bruno Foucard had been Minister of Culture, he had been a curator at the Louvre, and so on. Of course, Henri Cartier-Bresson, one of France's most famous photographers, issued this book saying why the project was such a mistake, and started the whole political debate, which lasted the whole length of the project. Next. They said that this space here, the Cour Napoleon, was one of the most beautiful places in all of Paris and could not be touched. Of course, next. When we were there, when we saw it, it looked like this. It was a private parking lot for the Ministry of Finance. So we started to look at the project and we said, this is what you have today, how you can get through, the places that you can get through from the right bank on this side of France to go, Paris, to go to the left bank over on this side. Next. And we did a whole urbanistic study to show how the project, by changing the traffic, by opening up that passageway and so on, it would open up the whole city of Paris. And we presented it to the mayor of Paris, Jacques Chirac, who was the head of the opposition party. And Jacques Chirac said yes. And that got everybody excited. And then, so you had this whole thing, the Battle of the Pyramid, for, against, and so on, led by the one newspaper, right-wing newspaper in France called Figaro, which this is our article about that. So we had this whole debate, and we had to embark on a whole public relations campaign. This is something that they don't tell you in architecture school, that you have to do that. but we had to assist. Can we have the next one? And of course, even Time magazine reported on this. And so we made drawings showing how big it was going to be, what the proportions would be, and so on. This was in the very early days before everybody was making computer perspectives, but we commissioned these computer drawings to show exactly what it would look like and looked at from different points of view. Next. We made more models, bigger scale each time. But, and this is something which I've learned here in Mexico, in France they have what they call septennat, which is a presidential term of 7 years. And there was not much of a likelihood that Mitterrand would get reelected for another septennat. And so we had to go fast, because if the project did not arrive at a certain state by the end of his term, it would be undone. And so they started, even before we had finished designing the project, they started digging and doing the archaeological digging inside the courtyard. Here you can see, and they found all the foundations of all those houses that had been built up against the palace in the different times of its history. This was the single largest archaeological project ever undertaken in France. And so while they were digging, next, and digging down, further and further down, we discovered these other foundations and basements and all kinds of, you can imagine, all kinds of artifacts. Next. And finally, we arrived at untouched soil. But Mayor Chirac was under tremendous pressure by his members of his party. And so one day he said, well, I know I approved the project, but I really want to see a little bit better what it looks like. I don't know how many of you speak French. This says, Grand Louvre, Chirac demands a life-size mock-up, life-size model. Well, this might seem strange to you that somebody would say, build a full-size one so I can see if I like it. But we did. But you know the Arc de Triomphe in Paris was built in a wooden model before it was approved also. And also the tower, the column at the Place de la Bastille was also built full scale so that the French people, Parisians, could approve it. And so we made this full scale, and you can see here it was built on top of all of those archaeological diggings that were there. Next. And of course, then the public was invited to come and take a look at it, and Mr. Chirac said, I'm not opposed to the pyramid. So that was a big sigh of relief, as you can imagine. Next. And of course, immediately, the people who are running the project made a public opinion poll and discovered that 50% of the Parisians were in favor of this project. Next. Now, the excavations were going on, and over on the other side of the Louvre, what do you suppose we found? The bottom of that original round tower dating from the 12th century. Still there, the top of course was gone, but this was still there. And so we had to stop the project and figure out what to do with that, because this is really the beginning of the whole Louvre, right here. And so next. So here you can see them they even found a gold crown when they dug down in here, in the moat. And we found also another little piece of wall when we dug down. this is dating from the time of Henry IV that I showed you before. You can maybe recognize some of those details. And so these pieces had to be incorporated into our project. Next. And here is this piece during the construction after it was taken away and put back. Next. And the round tower here was also preserved and put with a concrete roof on the top, and is now, you can also, if you've been there, you can visit this part and see this part of the Louvre. Next. And here is also part of that space. This was a support for one of the drawbridges that went into the palace. Next. So then, here, this is really quite interesting because those of you who are architects, particularly those of you who are in charge of the construction part, I think will find this very interesting, and even those of you who are not architects will appreciate what it takes to actually build something that at the end looks very simple, but the process is quite complicated. So we finally got down to the very bottom. This was about, from the original level, it was about 12 to 14 meters down. So we're actually below the level of the Seine right here. And of course, the Ministry of Finance was still occupying this building, so we had to keep a way to get fire trucks to get there just in case anything should happen. And we had to preserve all of the electrical and telephone lines and so on. Next. But we had to build the pyramid first. And this is part of this mandate, because what had happened in the meantime is President Mitterrand's party, the Socialist Party, lost the intermediate election, and the right-wing party won the election, and they refused to vacate this building. So we had to go so fast to build this one first, because they had what was called cohabitation at that time in France. So we were asked to design the pyramid so it could be built before everything else. It's like building your house and building the roof before you've built any of the walls to hold it up. So here we had to support the pyramid on special steel that was made, so it was put in, and you can see this is, next. While everything is still being built in the basements, we're already up to the ground level to support the pyramid. Next. And of course, this required pouring some of the finished concrete work early on. Next. And so here you can see the construction is continuing on. This is now in, I think, 1986. Pyramid work is coming along. They're putting up the scaffolding to hold it up. Next. And now, some of the pyramid you can see is being built over here. This part is now coming up to the mezzanine level. Next. Of course, the president came to visit us quite frequently, often surprise visits. He would come early in the morning and walk around the site. Meanwhile, building the formwork for the concrete ceilings. And all the reinforcing and post-tensioning cables and electrical wires and ductwork and lighting, everything all had to be worked out for this to be put in early on. Next. Next. Now we had a special elevator that we had put in because this building and every piece of the museum that we touched was made completely accessible to handicapped people. So this elevator was ordered very early on, came next, and was installed. You can see the pyramid still isn't finished, and yet the elevator has already gone in because there was no way to bring it in afterwards, France. Now you can see the structure of the pyramid is almost finished over here. Cleaning the concrete on the inside. We're getting into 1988 at this time. And by the way, fortunately, because 1988 was the end of the 7 years, and we were only at this point at that time. But fortunately, President Mitterrand was re-elected. So he did get a second term. And I think maybe part of the reason was because of this project, because the Minister of Finance, who was over here, made such a big stink about it that everybody decided that it was time for him to go. So he was re-elected, and the project was able to proceed, but otherwise we would have been about here, and I think that it's fair to say that at this stage, the project is, what they said in France, was irreversible. Next. Here you can see at that time from the top. Now all the structural connections for the pyramid are being put together. Here is a full-sized sample of the glass that was to go in. It was there we put that up for the president to see. Continuing on. Scaffolding is out now, you can see, and they're still working now on the top. Of course, a lot of work going on the inside. Here's the glass being put into the pyramid. Finally, the whole square was done, and the fountains around the outside, not yet filled with water. Glass being cleaned. I think my father was pretty happy at that time. Of course, they did say, but how are you going to clean this thing? And so somebody came along and brought a little robot that they said, you just signed a contract with us. Look how well it works. Climbed up and down the pyramid with this robot. There you can see it going up and down. But at the end of the day, they decided to use mountain climbers and clean it with the conventional methods. Except the inside, of course, was a little bit more tricky. And there's what it looks like when you stand inside. And finally, we got the fountains going over here. Our offices we were housed in these temporary buildings in the background over there. Now, for the statue, what do you suppose we proposed to put at the end of the axis of the Champs-Élysées? We made a lead cast of Bernini's statue of Louis XIV and put it there. And it was our way of saying to another foreign architect that, yes, you will have something at the Louvre as well. Because you can imagine that we had a terrible time with the French architects in the beginning as well, so with all of the political debate. So Bernini is now right here, and when you go to Paris and you look at that statue and you say, what is that? Now you can say, was a kind of like a little secret of ours between architects. And even people who are not known for being sympathetic to modern architecture came and thought it looked quite good. This, of course, is Prince Charles. And then the grand opening in 1989. And there was no real ceremony, just cut the ribbon and open the doors and let everybody in. So, but that was a great day in 1989. And so the doors were opened and people just came in, down the escalators, or down the stair over here, or the elevator, which is in the middle of this stair. And then later on, further to the west, an underground commercial area was opened up, which connects into the Louvre. And so now, of course, the attendance at the museum is way up, but unfortunately there are still lines to get in. But it's another place for Parisians and then there's just some pictures of the building that we took. Although a lot of these pictures were taken by a good friend of ours named Marc Ribot, who's quite a well-known French photographer. And now, of course, when you go to Paris, you have the Arc de Triomphe, and you have Sacré-Cœur, and you have Notre Dame, and you have the pyramid itself. So I think that, they told us in France, they said, everybody will be opposed to this project, but when it's finished, they will love it. I couldn't quite understand that, but in fact it's true. Now they don't even know what this place would be like without the pyramid. Next. And so it's now used, was used here, this is the other President Bush, when they had the Green Summit meeting. All of the reception meetings were held there. Next. Here's that stair and the elevator, which just goes up, completely unsupported. And here, after it's finished, my father again, the Minister of Culture, from that same spot, looking down at what he had been pointing to before when there was nothing there. Next. And, this is cropped out. My father is actually over here. Another Légion d'honneur. This is our whole family. And that's it. Okay. Thank you very much. Now it's my turn.
Quisiéramos que nos hicieran llegar, por favor, preguntas acerca de la exposición del arquitecto. Se tienen por ahí papelitos distribuidos, no sé si hay alguna forma de colectarlos. Si hubiera alguna pregunta que quisieran hacer de manera verbal, pues lo podemos hacer también. ¿Sí?
¿Qué hicieron con toda la piedra que estaba debajo de
what they do about all the earth that stay under the terrain.
Well, that's an interesting question. No, that was actually a big problem because you can imagine, of course, it was trucked away. The answer is it was trucked away. The problem was that it was so many trucks and had to go out through the center of Paris. So it had to be done only at night so that it wouldn't disrupt the traffic. And when the trucks left with all the dirt, they had to go through a special area to have all the wheels and the whole under part of the truck was cleaned off so that they wouldn't leave traces of dirt on the way out of Paris. So it's another one of those logistical problems that, nobody thinks about really, but until you're in the middle of the problem. I can't tell you how much earth there was, however, if you want to ask me that question.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Sí.
Well, I haven't lived in that many cities, so I don't think I'm a good judge. I live in New York. I think New York is a wonderful place to live, but New York, like a lot of cities, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good, and depends a little bit on the economy and things like that. But today, New York is a wonderful place to live.
¿Alguien más? ¿Sí?
Okay, that's a good question too. I'm afraid I didn't have enough time to go through the whole evolution of the design. I put these pictures together to show more the story of the whole project. But that is a good question. The pyramid, we wanted to have something, it's really, as I said, it's a big skylight. But we wanted the skylight to be something which would have the least visual impact on the view, either from, particularly from outside. And the pyramid is the most stable structural form and occupies less volume, for example, than, let's say, a dome or a cube or something like that. And because it tapers down in this shape, it blocks the view a lot less. And we made a number of demonstrations, not just to the president, but to different groups to explain the difference. And then we had to also explain what proportion, what steepness of pyramid do you want to have? Can it be like flat like this, or should it be steep like this? It was a long process, but in the end, we decided that the steepness of the pyramid that we have at the Louvre is the same as the steepness of the pyramid, of the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Giza.
Aquí tenemos otra pregunta. Le dicen al arquitecto que por qué fue escogido para este proyecto y por qué no escogieron a un arquitecto francés.
I didn't understand you. Maybe I don't need to use these earphones.
Yeah.
Is it on?
How were you chosen to make the project, and why didn't they choose a French architect?
Okay, another good question. This project was not a competition. It was the selection of my father was done directly by the president. However, the laws in France require competition. And so there was a competition to do the programming for the project. And a lot of teams of architects and programmers came together to make a program. In fact, I believe one of the teams was Mr. Ramiro
Pedro Ramirez Vázquez.
from Mexico, submitted one of the projects for the programming. At the end, a French team was selected to do the programming, and my father was one of the members of the jury that selected them. And so they started to do the program, and then after that, they just said, well, the architect is IMP. So it was, but this is something that only the French know how. I think only the French have mastered how to kind of get around the rules.
Okay. Here's another question. Did you have a special system to keep rainwater out of the site?
The project has, actually we haven't had any problem with water. The perimeter wall has waterproofing applied to the outside. And in fact, we haven't had any problems with water. The technical solution, I mean, it's quite complicated. You have waterproofing on the top, of course, which everybody is probably the simplest, but you also have the waterproofing around the side to keep it from coming in, and from the bottom, where the problem is really the water pressure to keep it in. But, and then you have, on the top of that, you have the problem to keep the building from popping out of the ground. But these are problems that our structural engineers were responsible to solve, and so far I haven't heard of any problems with that. We even have art storage rooms underground.
Okay. What inspired your project? The inspiration of your project?
The inspiration?
Where is?
Well, this particular project, I think is clear, is my father's project. So I think you have to ask him that particular question. But
for your project?
For my own projects?
Yes.
Okay. For my own projects, I think that what we do is we really have to, each project has its own context, its own place, and its own program. And it's from all of that, that's the work of the architect, is to somehow take, you know, thousands of different reasons why a project should be one way and come up with something that answers all of them. And it's a question of what the client wants, what is his budget, what is his schedule, all of those things. Plus, you know, what is it that, what does the city need, or with a location? All of those things are part of it. I don't think that there is any single inspiration for any project. It's just, it's an integration of all of those kinds of, let's say, input.
Okay. Thank you. There's another question.
Seeing the first sketches that your father draw on the pyramid, and they rotated the pyramid, what is the reason this change?
I think that one of the things that, and those of you who are architects who have people that work for you can appreciate, when you have an idea and you start to draw, you cannot take the sketch literally and try to execute the sketch. You have to think about what it means. And I say that he never meant for it to be that way. It was just drawing of some forms which generated a whole series of geometrical, further geometrical forms. And so when you think about it, and you think about the problems when it was decided that you had to enter this. As I recall, Ramiro Vázquez also proposed a skylight, but said it would be impossible to enter the skylight. And so that you had to have a separate way to come in around, to go underground. And so that But because this came out of the ground, we decided that you had to actually enter. That was a big problem. How do you enter into such a pure form? But I think to answer your question, it's really, you have to have people who work for you who are able to take a kind of an idea and go further with it and advance the idea each time.
The last question is, how much is the cost of the project?
I have no idea. I'm sorry, everybody always wants to know that question, but I can tell you that officially, the project was on the budget. When I say that, and I don't know if the French government officials who are doing the accounting studied at Arthur Andersen or something, but what happens in this kind of projects is you have things that happen during the course of the project that are not part of the original budget. For example, when we discovered a lot of those things underground, and when it was decided to keep them, there was an extra cost that was calculated at that time because nobody was going to throw those things away. So that was an extra cost, and I don't know what that was, what was negotiated. When the Minister of Finance decided not to move out during the cohabitation, there was a cost to his staying because we had already started to demolish a lot of his building, and we had to put it all back. So that was an extra cost. And I think that what happened is that because part of the increase in the cost, and whether they assigned the real value or made up a new value, I don't know, but because part of the increase was because of the opposition party, then after that there was no real opposition to the cost of the project because one side wanted the project, the other side was more neutralized. So unfortunately I can't tell you the project cost, and I suppose somebody knows it, but I don't.
You have to remain there. Okay. Hoy hemos presenciado el testimonio arquitectónico de D.D. Pei y su arquitectura de calidad, que se conecta con el lugar y el tiempo, y con la gente sobre todo. Hoy ya no somos los mismos, D.D. Pei. No podemos. Esta conferencia nos ha transformado, nos obliga a la reflexión. A nombre del capítulo en Monterrey de la Academia Nacional de Arquitectura, recibe nuestro reconocimiento, respeto y aprecio, y al hacerlo, te entregamos una pieza especial hecha por el artista y académico Javier Meléndez. Recíbelo con mucho gusto de parte nuestra.
Thank you very much. It's beautiful.
Así como también un diploma de reconocimiento, y acepta que a partir de hoy tu nombre se sume a los de César Pelli, Richard Rogers, Ricardo Legorreta y Santiago Calatrava, entre otros, como miembro honorario de este capítulo. Bienvenido. Y gracias.
They're both.
Oh,
Two.
two.
Titles, yeah. One is the other one. There you go.
Okay.
The hand on the wall. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Congratulations.
Con esto terminamos nuestra sesión de esta mañana. Les agradecemos a todos profundamente su asistencia y los esperamos el año próximo a los eventos que hemos preparado para ustedes. Muchas gracias.
¿Algún comentario? ¿Quiere hacer algún comentario?
El arquitecto Pei quiere hacer un comentario. ¿No? Ok. That's it.
Okay.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. It's quite beautiful.
Okay. Javier.
Muy bien. Very good.
Okay.
Very good.
Felicidades. Very good.
Let me to introduce you to a friend and a sculptor, Javier Meléndez.
hizo mal.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me see.
Then you met the artist of this.
Yes, I know. Let me see. I brought a few of those, but I didn't bring so many. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to.
Ok. Qué bueno que nos acompañaron, ¿eh?
Sí,
No vale la pena, ¿verdad? Qué bueno, sí, qué gusto. ¿Listo? Take a picture.
Esto es que tenemos el podio de
Vamos con el Sí, vamos. Nos vamos por unos meses. Pásale, aquí estamos.
No, it's always okay. Closer. All right.
Ahí ya se va a quedar el...
Just don't back up anymore.
Buena step.
Listo, ok.
Muy bien. Okay. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much. I hope so. It's actually quite a good organization.
Ándale.
You live in it?
Yes, yes. I born in Coahuila.
Sí, tengo la despedida de Rashid.
Bueno, pues
por más que le decimos a Dios, no.
No se quiere ir, ¿verdad?
Pero terminando la
Estamos en el Fundadores. Y a las 5 nos recibe Dina. Aprovechar sacarle jugo.
Hola, Tony. Hola.
¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien.
Dile que se va a ir a trabajar con él.
Eliseo. Está Pati. Patricia. Fine lady. A friend.
Gracias.
Linda amiga.
Una foto. Nos tomamos una foto. Venga, vente, Tony. Vente, Patricia, vente.
Bueno, y me dan una copia.
Sí, claro que sí. Qué gusto que estés con nosotros, ¿eh? Sí, ¿no? Dale. Nunca se deja aquí, Fernando. Va a tener que agachar un poquito. Ok. A ver, ahora sí tráeme la foto, tráeme la cámara, rápido. Dale, Yanina. ¿Y Mari Carmen? Aquí está. Dale, perfecto.
Oye, sí, pero grande.
What do you feel?
Better than yesterday. Yesterday was a good one. That's not my fault.
Really? You rest. Listo. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Don't worry. Inmediatamente, claro que yes. Este póngale el plástico ahorita a los señores.
Who took the microphone? I think it's on the...
Ya. Listo, vamos a tomar una foto. Una foto, ok.
También.
Bueno, estamos aquí.
So the pictures were okay.
Listo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alexander.
No, I took it off. I gave it to...
Oye, Juan Carlos.
Dale.
¿Nos vas a acompañar, verdad? Sí.
Oye, pues sí, yo fíjate que quiero una foto.
Claro, por favor, seguro. Ahorita mismo.
Pero ya estás ya tocada ya la abriste. Sí, Tina, ya Tina. Ah, bueno. Con tu foto, ándale.
Okay.
Siguiendo con mi foto.
Okay, mirando aquí, por favor. Thank you.
Excuse me, would you mind to sign a picture for my father? He's a huge fan of and we were in Hong Kong this year.
Oh, you were?
So he explained me all the history about the construction.
Yes.
We were inside the building and he loved it.
Okay.
He is my father.
What is his name?
O sea, que no. Entonces nos hablamos que ya no va a haber nadie. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Órale, el de la noche.
Thanks. Dancing party. Gracias.
Vale, bueno.
¿Pareció bien?
Okay. Rulli.
Just another one. Oh, okay.
Vete, ponte ahí con él. Del otro lado. Sí, no, es que él de cuenta en realidad
the flashing. Did it go? Oh, on the front? On the front?
Yeah. You're famous.
This is also my father's building, so it's that's better. This one, this one is permanent. It'll never come off. I better let it dry. All right. I already know where to do this one.
Qué bueno que vengas a coordinar que funcione y ahora échate primero por aquí porque hay que poner la pirámide ahí. Sí, ¿verdad?
Okay. Who do I make? I can make this one for something. For them.
Okay. A una sola, ok, una sola. Bueno, déjalo.
Bless you.
One for you. Thank you.
De ladito.
Por el video.
Ahí está, un segundo.
Okay.
Ahí está.
It's good with this.
It's very good with this.
Aquí préstamo.
Oye, yo ¿cómo con mis caras? Ándale, ¿cómo? Sí. A ver.
Es preferible juntos porque da el charolazo un poco feo. Si quieres hacer que salga. Ok, mirando aquí, por favor. Aquí sonriendo.
Whiskey.
Thank you.
Architecto, I have the pleasure of meeting you. I love very much architecture. I'm here.